Welcome to Upstate Impact, the podcast that explores the stories of business owners, leaders, and influential figures shaping upstate New York. Each episode uncovers their path, the challenges they've faced, and the impact they're making in their industries and communities. And now, your host, Luke Cometti.
We're here with Scott Gasparini, Vice President of Gasparini Landscaping, hardscape, sunrooms, custom homes, fences. Am I missing anything?
A lot of everything residential. Almost anything.
Strictly residential?
About 95% residential. That's kind of our niche. We dabble a little bit commercial here and there, but primarily residential.
Awesome. You guys have been in business for quite a while. Why don't you just quickly give us a rundown of the history of Gasparini Landscaping?
Yeah, definitely. My father started it over 45 years ago, and ever since then, we've kind of evolved from a landscaping company all the way to a design build construction company, doing everything from interior renovations, kitchens, bathrooms, additions, all the way to new custom home builds, and then all the exterior stuff, hardscapes, landscapes, fences, basically anything residential, you name it, we'll do it.
That's pretty cool. I mean, obviously 45 years?
Oh, yep. I think this is our 47th year in business we're entering.
Wow. And I was reading on your website, I think it was your dad and one other who started it,
1979, just him and one other guy. And right now we got a staff about 30 some guys in the field. So,
wow.
How
did that evolve? Like, what did they start with? What was their bread and butter? What was their niche that they ended up leaning into, and then obviously expanding to a lot of different offerings? But, just kind of walk us through how that happened, because it's kind of inspiring, right? For someone who wants to, hey, just meet another guy. Let's start doing some work. Let's do it well and see what we can make of this. I think that the story is pretty cool to see over that amount of time, and maybe just walk us through it.
Yeah, he started out as more of a commercial contractor, doing a lot of mass tree plantings, corporate offices. We did a lot of work in downtown Syracuse 40 years ago. We did a lot of the street tree plantings along, in Armory Square, Hanover Square, the city of Oswego. He did a lot of street tree plantings up there. Back then it used to be a lot of landscaping, actually, tree shrub planting, and nowadays people want less landscaping and more outdoor living. So it's really evolved that way over the years. We still put in our fair share of plants, trees, and all of that, but more so it's kind of evolved more into outdoor living is what's trending more.
When was the change from commercial to residential, and why?
Yeah, probably I'd say late 90s. I think he transitioned more into residential. People were spending more money on their homes, investing more in their homes. Pools started becoming more popular for the everyday homeowner. So more towards that end, we kind of jumped into residential, and it was less competitive. Really profit margins were a lot better. Commercial is all about lowest bidder, who can do it the cheapest, the quickest. Quality really went out the window when you do commercial, because it's all about how cheap can you do it and how quickly can you get it done. He had more of a feeling for putting out a good product, using quality materials, really having craftsmen on staff, doing an A+ job was what he really wanted to do. And he felt he couldn't really be competitive in the commercial.
Yeah, it's kind of a race to the bottom with commercial a little bit. And I think with residential, I like the term you used, invest in their homes. Because I think there's definitely a balance there. I think some people spend money on their homes and some people invest in their homes. And I guess, in your opinion, what are some of the things that you would consider an investment in your home? Something that, hey, this is our first home, maybe not our forever home. What's a good spend, right? Obviously, it's nice to have nice things at the house you're living in, but when you're thinking long term, it's like, all right, what are we going to see back as far as when we sell this place? Or even for a forever home, something that, hey, I mean, forever is only still finite in a way.
Yeah.
And it's hey, when we end up selling this house, whenever that is, or just something that's going to hold its value, something that's going to really add to the home.
Yeah, definitely. Your common living spaces, where you tend to gather the most as a family. Inside your kitchen and bathrooms, naturally that's where most people spend most of their times. Outside, a deck patio, a nice outdoor living space. Those are your best return on investments. Um, I love doing big backyards, putting in pools, stuff like that, but pools really don't carry a huge return on investment. It's more personal enjoyment. When you go to sell your home, some people look at it as a pool has more maintenance, more headaches, more upkeep, and they're not really, helping with that selling point of having a pool versus, a nice outdoor living space, a nice deck, a nice patio, maybe some sort of 3-season, 2-season covered porch, screen room, something where people can enjoy the outdoor more, in the inclement weather when it's snowing, raining, a
Yeah.
little bit cold, um, stuff like that. Those are your best returns on investments. Um, Adding curb appeal to your house, new front door, new garage door. Those have been really popular the past couple years. You see people spending a lot of money on garage doors, where 10 years ago it was white, tan, or gray, and
Yeah.
how they're doing some fancy things with garage doors.
Are you guys thinking about getting into garage doors, or have you done any?
Had never done any, probably not. It's a small market. Not everybody's putting in garage doors, regularly. It's one
True.
thing you put in a garage door and, you live with it for 20 years. But that seems to be a new trend is, those curve appeal from the front of the road, garage doors, windows, doors, those kind of been things people like.
It's interesting you bring up pools, and it's kind of, you've heard that adding a pool doesn't necessarily add too much value to the home. And I would imagine the biggest reason is it kind of limits your pool of potential buyers when you go to resell. Now, I think personally, we have kids. Of course, it would be great to have a pool, but we had young kids. And it's like, well, we want to wait till they're old enough so it's not dangerous. And then also, you get to the point where your kids are older and the pool wouldn't really be used. And now all of a sudden, that older generation may not want the maintenance of a pool. So I'd imagine the biggest reason for that is it just kind of limits who's going to have that interest. And then that just limits the buying pool. Correct?
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of people look at a pool as, oh, they're nice, but they're not for me. I don't have the time to maintain it. I'm not going to use it. Whether your kids are too young and the nervous mother about little Johnny wandering off into the pool area unexpectedly at 4 or 5 years old and not really knowing how to swim. That's a big fear of a lot of parents with young kids is drowning. That's probably one of the leading causes of deaths, I'd imagine, for young
That
kids,
age, yeah.
that age group. And vice versa. Older people, their kids are off in college. They don't really have anybody using that pool anymore, and it's kind of just sitting there. You're paying for it, you're heating it, or the electrical opening, closings. There's all costs associated with having a pool.
Especially in upstate New York.
Exactly. When you can really only use it from Labor Day to or Memorial Day to Labor Day.
Yeah.
So it's a very short season here.
I've never owned a pool, but I imagine, yeah, like post Labor Day, heating the pool, it's like usually it stays pretty warm during the day, but when it gets cool at night, I imagine that adds quite a burden to your electrical bill.
Definitely. Whether it's gas powered or
Or gas, yeah.
electrical, you're probably, spending per month, a few $100s to, heat that pool if you have a heater.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's just another reason that it's obviously if it's for you and you're going to get the use out of it, investing in something like that. It's not necessarily a financial investment. It's a family investment, right? If your kids
Exactly.
are going to love it, you're going to spend time there. I hope people have pools because we love to go to friends' houses who have pools. But at the same time, personally, I don't know if it would be a fit for us just because of a lot of those things you mentioned.
Yeah. Believe it or not, we offer a service. We fill in pools. Probably
Do you do more of those in the new pools?
no, but we one or two a year we'll fill in whether it's an old pool or it's an elderly couple that had a pool their whole life and their kids are off, doing their own thing and they don't want it anymore. So we take the pool out, we fill it in and, give them their backyard back.
Yeah. What does that process look like? You fill in the pool. Now it's just like a basketball court?
Exactly.
Like,
Or a nice green space, for their backyard. But
well, how do you make it green? Do you put sod over it? Like,
yeah, exactly.
okay.
Fill it in with dirt, and,
Okay.
put grass over it.
If I'm a homeowner and we're looking for our next investment in our house, in your opinion, what would be the play? Like, I just think of our house. Everything's livable, but it's all a little outdated in a way. And it's almost like we could do this, we could do the kitchen, we could do a bathroom, we could do, outside, maybe we could do some hardscape. There's a lot of things we could potentially do. We could add square footage, above the garage. We have a space. If there's homeowners, like myself, who are like, not really sure what we want to do, what would you advise doing first? Or it's like, hey, this is a safe bet. Let's say you don't end up staying in that house. This is, probably your safest bet in your opinion.
Yeah. So typically, your home isn't that old and, it's in great shape. So it's a tough one. But,
Any home.
most return on your investments are your kitchens and bathrooms. That's where buyers tend to look the most. That's where they're the most critical. Is what the kitchen looks like. How does it function? How are the appliances, the countertop? What quality are the cabinets? So your kitchen and bathrooms are your main points in a house. Because that's where most families gather. That's where you spend most of your time. When you're at home.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Is there anything else that, kitchen, baths, you hear that a lot. Is there anything else that you would think is, hey, this actually does pretty well? I just think of, I'm looking out on your showroom here and I see this beautiful hardscape and right, you got the pavers, you got the stone. I imagine it lasts a long time. And compared to what it would be if there was no sort of hardscape there, it looks like it would add tremendous value. What do you see? I know that's a specialty of Gasparini Landscaping. What do you see on like the return on investment and something like that?
Yeah, so definitely, a deck, patio, some sort of small outdoor living space is definitely a great return on investment. People, ever since COVID, especially, they're investing more in their outdoor living. They really want their space of their own, to be outside, to entertain guests, to just enjoy the short season we have in Syracuse outside, get the fresh air. So definitely a small patio, small deck, outdoor living space, a screened room, sunroom type thing. Those are good return on investments on an exterior of a home.
Absolutely. And you're talking about the limited time you kind of enjoy outside, but I think if you have one of the fire pits you have over here, I'm sure that kind of extends the life of the hardscape or the patio, right?
Definitely, yeah. So there's things you can do to extend it. The fire pits, fireplaces. If you look above your head, that's an infrared heater. That's actually meant to be outside. Those are infrared heaters that you put in pergolas and gazebos, and they really
Yep.
heat up the space nice.
Very cool. Is that your typical size? I know the viewers can't see it, but it looks like to be about what, 4 feet by 5 inches?
Yeah, that's actually a smaller one. But they come all the way up to like a 12-inch by 60-inch, putting out 6,000 watts of heat, which is pretty big.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about custom homes.
Yep.
Something that I think is relatively new for you guys at Gasparini Landscaping. I know it's something that you're spearheading. First, what got you into custom homes? What made you want to? Obviously, you got your bread and butter with the landscape, the hardscape, all the things you talked about before. But now you're building new homes. What got you into that?
That was kind of always my dream, my what I wanted to do, my passion. So when COVID hit, a lot of people kind of looked at life and rethought things. Time is limited, and what am I doing? Not trying to pursue my dream right now. So that's kind of what my dream was to start building custom homes. And since then, I've enjoyed it. I love it. It's fun most of the time. But it's really been a more of a kind of not a hobby, but it's something I've always wanted to do. And
I'm sure you've learned
Learned a
quite
lot.
a bit.
Learned a lot. There's a lot more that goes into building a home than, you see when you look at the finished product, all the little details, all the choices to pick out. You can make the wrong choices and spend too much money and be underwater pretty quickly in building.
Given what you've learned, you've done renovation, now you've done custom homes. If you're someone, a family, a couple, or whoever who's interested in potentially building a new home or maybe buying a, I don't know, what certified pre-owned, whatever you want to call it, someone, just buying an existing house, how, what would you say, like, what would steer you one way or the other? Hey, if you're like this, maybe you want to stick to something that's already built, right? You maybe save some money. Some of those decisions are made for you. You're kind of stuck with what you have in a way, or obviously the clean slate of a new house. How would you nudge a family or a couple one way or the other?
Yeah, if you're very indecisive, you have trouble making decisions. Definitely buy a pre-built house or a used home. Because your decisions are already picked for you. Versus building a custom home, there's so many decisions to be made, so many choices, and it can become overwhelming. And a lot of relationships do take a toll when they build a home because of all the choices, the stress you're put under,
Yeah.
the timelines, and
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty indecisive with some of that stuff, so I'm kind of glad we bought an existing house at this point. But not saying I would rule it out for the future. And you're right. That's what I think of is just how many decisions have to be made. And I'm sure you guys help with that. I'm sure there's easy ways to do it. There's a lot of resources now online and things that can help you. But let's say I made the decision. Hey, my wife and I, we want to build a home. What would you recommend doing before even talking to a contractor? What are some things you should get in line, some things you should have figured out to make that process go smooth?
yeah, definitely. Budget. How much you can afford, how much you're willing to spend. Some key things you're looking for. Whether it's a 3 or 4 bedroom, 2 or 3 bath, size of the home. Do you have 4 kids that are young? Do you want them all on one level? Do you want a master bedroom on the first floor like you have? Uh, do you want a lot of space? Do you want to be right on top of your neighbor?
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the master on the I guess primary on the first floor. That's something. I mean, it's nice. Obviously we moved to a house with that, but I imagine that's something for a forever home, right? If as I start to age, my wife starts to age, it gets harder and harder to walk upstairs. If you have that master on the first floor, I imagine it extends your time inside that house. Is that
Exactly.
usually the reason for it?
Exactly. People are planning for the future, with that master on the primary on the first floor. That's actually been a big thing lately is, whether it's an in-law suite being built off the first floor or kind of like an aging in place addition, where they're building a second master on the first floor, so they don't have to do stairs anymore. So that's somebody who's planning for the future, for their forever home, whether they plan to be there for 30 years or, they know they have bad knees and they're not going to be able to do a flight of stairs 2, 3 times a day. And they want everything on a 1 story living.
Install one of those little seat elevators. Those are pretty cool.
Yeah.
So we decided we're building. We know what type of land. We know the neighborhood. Maybe we figured out the plot of land, things like that. We know our budget. But I'm sure there's even some nuances within that, right? And one thing that comes to mind is kind of like I was talking about with the renovations of the house or adding, new home improvements. Where is it good to spend the money, and where is it good to be frugal?
Yeah. So, great places to spend the money are, energy efficient ways, whether it's upgraded insulation, upgraded windows. Those things are big return on your investment in the long run. If you plan on being in that house for 15, 20 years, you really want to invest in those energy efficient things. Just over time, the cost savings from energy efficient windows, good insulation, they're just going to pay off in the long run. Um, so those are some spots I tell people don't be frugal on
Yeah.
because in the long run, it's going to save you money. Um, Other things, don't be frugal on are, the quality of fixtures. You can go
I don't
to
know if frugal is the right term. Right? Don't be cheap
don't be
on
cheap.
that. Yes.
Because you can go to Lowe's and buy a $150 kitchen faucet, that's gonna last you, a year, 2 years with a heavy use family, or you can go buy a nice $300 kitchen faucet that's gonna last you 5, 6, plus years and isn't gonna be leaky or anything like that. So some of the, just, cheap, cheap things out there. You can buy almost anything online from other countries that are just made a lot cheaper.
Yeah. And then where would you save money? Where would you, I say be frugal, but one thing that comes to mind is maybe don't finish your basement right away, right? Something that's not going to add to the square footage, add to potentially the tax on the house, the property tax. Is there anything kind of like that you say, maybe wait on that or wait to do X because you want to make sure that's something you want to use or you're going to want after a year?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Waiting to finish your basement, so you're not getting the additional, square foot tax on that. That's a big cost to finish a basement right up front. Some other things you can kind of cut corners on. Keeping bedrooms carpet. A lot of people have been trending to putting, hardwoods or LVL flooring in bedrooms, which adds a significant cost to a new home. I personally like carpet in the bedrooms.
It's comfortable.
It's more comfortable, especially on your bare feet. So that's one way to kind of, cut a corner to say and, not spend that extra money that isn't really needed. Um,
And it's not really that expensive to replace carpet.
no, it's actually relatively very cheap.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, there's just like you're saying, there's cheaper carpet, there's more expensive, but at the end of the day, you could, replace that carpet before you sell it. You got brand new, relatively soft carpet in there. I think that's probably just, it's going to catch a homeowner's eye, just like a hardwood floor in there. Today's episode of Upstate Impact is brought to you by Renewal by Andersen of Central New York, the window and door replacement company setting the standard for quality and craftsmanship. If you're looking for durability, energy efficiency, and expert installation, Renewal by Andersen delivers. Their exclusive Fibrex material combines the strength of wood with the low maintenance benefits of vinyl, providing a stronger, more beautiful, and longer lasting solution for your home. With their signature service, every step, from design consultation to professional installation, is built around convenience, expertise, and long-term value. Their industry-leading process ensures a smart investment that enhances both comfort and style. Click the link in our show notes to set up a free quote today and take the first step towards transforming your home. Renewal by Andersen. Superior products, exceptional service. You do custom homes, if someone has questions or someone's thinking about it, they're probably, they can reach out to you and we'll have your information connected to the show here. But just in general, when you're looking, you've made the decision. Now it's like, all right, we got to talk to contractors. We got to talk to GCs, general contractors. What's your advice in finding the right fit? I
Yeah.
imagine just like anything, you want to find someone who's going to help you through that process. Obviously, you want someone who does good work, who's going to warranty their work in a way. But at the end of the day, it has to be a good fit. And what are, some suggestions you have what are some good questions to make sure that you're finding the right contractor?
Yeah. Um, a great way to find a good contractor is, word of mouth. Has he done work for your family, your friends, your neighbors? Have you seen them around doing projects in your area? Do they have a good online presence? How are their reviews on all the social media platforms? Google. Their time in business. Have they been around for a while? Do they have a good reputation? Um,
What makes a good contractor? Like hey, if they're able to do this, this, and this, that's probably worth having a conversation with them. I mean, obviously, I think like you said, it's really the word of mouth, right? If someone has a good experience with them, they're probably doing things right. And I imagine every house is different. Custom homes are all different. So I would imagine that word of mouth is the biggest thing. But, talking about doing things on the cheap,
mhm.
right? What are some red flags? if you're talking to a contractor, and this doesn't have to necessarily be for, building your home, but also like maybe just a project, what are some things to look out for? One thing that comes to mind, are they insured?
Yeah.
That's maybe something that's overlooked. Try to save a few bucks, make sure they're insured because that could be an issue for you as a homeowner or a potential homeowner, anything like that.
Yeah, definitely. So, you can be a contractor and be insured, but do they have enough insurance to do what they're doing? Are they underinsured?
Uh,
You see a lot of companies going around with, $100,000 in general liability insurance or $100,000 in workman's comp insurance. Is that going to cover something if they were to damage your home? If someone was to get injured at your property, you kind of want to look at the value of what you're paying to have something done, and is that insurance going to cover it? If a guy, falls off your roof and is paralyzed and he only has $100,000 in workers' comp insurance, is that going to cover that, for what he's doing to your home? Um, so being insured or being underinsured is a thing to look for in any good contractor. Um, Also, the proposal, does somebody kind of jot down on a loose leaf paper, it's going to cost this amount, very vague proposals. You want a more detailed proposal so you know what you're getting, what you're not getting, what's included. Um, so the whole scope of work, how they present themselves in a proposal. Um,
I imagine that's mutually beneficial.
exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
because
Cause
it's communication, so, you're setting the expectation so the homeowner knows and the contractor knows. So
that's
that
another
seems
thing
kind of
is
like a no-brainer.
big communication. If you're calling their office and you're not getting, prompt return phone calls, you're always getting an answering machine. You're not talking to a physical person when you're calling the office. It's always going to voicemail. What's their communication like? Because chances are, if that's how it starts, that's how it's going to be the whole progress of the project. It's not going to get better once they get the job. That's how they are. So communication is a big thing. How are they going to communicate you throughout the whole project? Throughout the good and the bad, because the projects, they're not always running smoothly. There are issues, and how are they going to communicate those issues to you? How are you going to get past those issues? So if they're not communicating up front, if you have to leave them 2 3 voicemails to get a return call, how are they communicating is a huge sign of how that contractor is going to be as a business.
Yeah, and I don't mean to stereotype, but I think anyone has heard that sometimes contractors aren't the most reliable.
That is a big, we got that name and being a contractor, they think all contractors are like that, but we're all not.
Yeah. I mean, what's the reason for that? Is that just, you always hear like, oh, if they go to, they get a bid for a bigger job, they'll go move to that job and then it'll delay your job. What are usually the reasons why? I mean, like you said, if you're not able to communicate and if they're, I guess, being unreliable, I mean, that's pretty obvious that maybe it's something, it's not how you build a good reputation. I'm sure, if you find that out, you probably won't use them again. But what are the reasons for that? I mean, when is it like, okay, this happens as a contractor, maybe give a little pass, they say 2 weeks, if it takes 3 weeks, that'll happen. That's just the nature of the work. And when is it like, hey, they said 2 weeks, it's 6 weeks, we still don't have the project done. Like, what's that threshold look like?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of it's, some contractors just don't care. They're always chasing, more money from someone else, and a better job comes along that they think is a funner job. So, oh, I'm gonna go do this because it's what I want to go do right now. I've seen a lot of projects. They start them, they leave, they'll come back, they'll leave, they'll come back. A project that should take 2 3 weeks ends up taking 6 8 weeks because the contractor's unorganized. He's juggling multiple jobs. He really, took on more than he can handle at the time. And so that's a big thing when looking at a contractor is what does his, team look like? Does he have an office staff? Does he have, support staff? Does he have actual in-house employees, or are they all subcontractors? Does he have a project manager that's going to be project managing the project as it goes along? 'Cause that's the biggest thing is a lot of these contractors, they just spread themselves so thin. They're trying to juggle too much at one time, and it leads to bad communication, and bad execution.
Well, all this bashing of contractors. Hey, I'm sick of it. I just want to do it myself. Um, so in that regard, as a homeowner, what do you recommend s- as a do-it-yourselfer? What are some things that you could do to help the value of your home and relatively safe for an amateur handyman, like a lot of homeowners are? And in contrary, where should you hire a professional?
Yeah. Yeah. So, painting, minor cabinet installation, a small bathroom vanity, some additional trim work here and there. Minor flooring, you want to redo the floor in a room, if it's LVP or, pre engineered hardwoods. Those smaller jobs, a job that really isn't going to take, you yourself much more than, 2, 3, 4 weekends to conquer. Those are something, homeowners can do. But if you're getting into a more elaborate project like renovating a kitchen or a bathroom, especially if it's your only bathroom in the house, imagine not having a bathroom for 2, 3 weeks. That could cause a little bit of disturbance in your marriage, in your family. Where are you going to go to the bathroom? You're going to have a porta potty in the garage and use that. So major
I mean, even
renovation.
going from 2 to 1, that's hard, right? When you're
Exactly.
used to having 2 bathrooms and then all of a sudden now you have 1, and
Especially with
everyone's
a family
sharing.
of 3, 4 people in a
Exactly.
household. So kitchens and bathrooms, and unless you're a really experienced, handy person, I definitely would not say take on those projects yourself. But minor things, yeah, flooring. If you don't have flooring in your living room for 2, 3 weeks, it's not the end of the world. Um, you're painting a room. If it takes you 2 to 3 weeks to paint a room from start to finish, it's not the end of the world. It's a disruption, but it's not life change
It's
you.
not the most aesthetically pleasing during the process, but hopefully it ends up being
Yeah,
a nice, a nice value to the home, a nice addition. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it is how much is it disrupting your day to day? Because even if you are, pretty handy, it's like, oh, I can, do this bathroom. Life happens,
yeah.
right? What is it like to not have that bathroom? Like, okay, you think it's going to take you 2 weekends, but let's say this, you don't know, life comes at you,
It
and all of a
always
sudden,
takes longer than you think.
well, that too, and then all of a sudden now it's 4 or 5 weekends. Like, are you okay with that?
Yeah,
Whereas, flooring, yeah, it's annoying, but it's not. It is what it is,
you can
right?
still
Where
go on and live your life, and
exactly, it doesn't really change your day to day. But not having a bathroom could really disrupt your day to day, or not having kitchen, or having to turn the water on and off and
yeah.
doing all these things. That could be quite a disruption, and I guess that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah. And you see when people take on these bigger projects, kitchens, baths, or decks, patios, window replacements. When you do it yourself, you're not an expertise. You tend to make more mistakes. The finished product tends not to come out as good as it should or as well as you want it to. And so return on investment typically isn't as high when you do it yourself. Because when you go to sell that home, all those flaws people are going to pick up on. Is everything square? Is the tile crooked? People pick up on those things. So your return on investment is a lot lower when you do it yourself, typically.
Yeah, and that was kind of part of that question is what's hard to mess up, I guess, right? Like 'cause you're right. If it's your kitchen cabinets are out of square, or they look off, that's gonna, right? Anyone who's looking at a home potential for that that resale value is gonna say, wait, in the kitchen, if there's lack of quality there, where else is there lack of quality? As opposed to maybe the basement floor.
Yeah.
Hey, if, every tile is not perfect, I think you can live with that. It's usually where the kids hang out, or whatever you use it for, a gym. I don't think that's the end of the world.
No, yeah, it's typically not a, everyday living space down there. So people tend to, look a little bit less at those details in the basement and in areas like that.
Well, as we wrap up here, obviously the weather is starting to turn, so I'm sure you guys are ramping up. And if whether they're interested in Gasparini Landscaping to do some work for them, or just have any sort of landscape, hardscape, exterior work, would you recommend reaching out now? I feel like it's like once the weather turns, people start to realize, oh man, my back patio is terrible, or like we could really use something here. And then all of a sudden now they're not scheduled till September.
Yeah.
when should you reach out? How should you plan for any sort of, especially exterior renovation of the house?
Yeah, definitely. The sooner you reach out for any contractor, the better, especially if you want it done sooner. That's a sign of a bad contractor is if he can, do the job
Start tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. That's typically the sign is he's not a good contractor because he doesn't have any work. Why doesn't he have any work? Any good reputable contractor should have a backlog, whether it's 4 or 5 weeks or, 2 to 3 months. Good contractors have backlogs. So if you're planning a project, you're thinking about planning a project, don't delay it. Don't say, oh, I'll wait until, the spring's really here to start planning that project. A good executed project takes, weeks, months to plan out and execute. So don't delay, don't put it on the back burner if it's something that is really, on your mind to do.
Good to know. Well, Scott, appreciate your time. Super informative, super helpful. I'm sure the listeners will get a lot out of this. I got a lot out of this, and best of luck here as you ramp up.
Thank you. Hey, I appreciate you having me on the podcast and enjoyed it.
That's it for this episode of Upstate Impact. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the conversation, make sure to subscribe and share. Stay tuned for more stories from the people shaping upstate New York. See you next time.